Today's guest, Dr. Mark Perlmutter, Global Vice President of the International College of Surgeons, President of the World Surgical Foundation.
No baby gets shot twice by a sniper bullet by accident. 4 gurneys tightly packed, and on each gurney, never less than 3 or 4 kids. A third were dead or dying. A third were savable, and a third will die. Everybody's missing a body part, or they have shrapnel penetrating their torso. The infection rate is 100%. A bullshit line that there's 40,000 Palestinians that are dead. Those are the bodies that were not under the rubble. The Lancet just came out with an article. They surmise that up to 250,000 are dead, which means that there may be even more, because many of the pieces of people that we saw were so vaporized, there's not going to be a way to count them. This battle that's going on in the Gaza Strip is not a Jewish versus Islamic battle. It's nothing more than a land grab, right? Let's call it what it is. Modern Zionism is just, I want your land.
Hello and welcome to episode 130 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram. And you can call me Mikey Intifada if you manufacture pagers.
Before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. You can also find us on Patreon, where you get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes and additional podcasts per week. We're also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod. Today's guest is Dr. Mark Perlmutter, Global Vice President of the International College of Surgeons, President of the World Surgical Foundation. He is an expert in hand surgery who has spent many years working in humanitarian situations, having done over 40 surgical missions on multiple continents, including having been there at Ground Zero on 9/11 and having volunteered in Haiti during the earthquake. Dr. Perlmutter has become very well known for his advocacy on Gaza, having traveled and treated patients in Gaza on several occasions during this current genocide. Dr. Perlmutter, welcome to the Palestine Pod.
Thank you very much. I'm honored.
Where do we begin? Why did you feel it was important to go to Gaza?
Largely out of guilt. I knew that Gaza was 50% children by population, the youngest demographic in the entire world. And I also know what a 2,000-pound bomb does. That was designed to go 60 feet underground and bust bunkers. I know that when it's dropped on a 2 or 3-story building, that the effect is more devastating, and it's equally non-discriminate. So at least 50% of the population that was decimated by our inappropriate funding of the war for Israel was going to be children. I ran a telehealth program with some of the global health issues that I do, and I was getting some X-ray pictures with some requests for help for trauma that was happening in Gaza after October 7th. Pictures were well done at first. The quality of the surgical outcomes were well done at first, and they started to deteriorate very, very, very quickly, acute change in them. And so without trying to insult the provider, I had asked them if they, what's going on. The quality of the work is suboptimal. Are you running out of supplies? What's the story? And the person who responded, Yusuf, said, well, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. I'm a medical student, and sometimes I have the help of an orthopedic resident, and all of the attendings had died in a bomb blast. And so that told me that they had no orthopedic surgeons there. So I decided to go with a very short notice. I contacted a friend of mine who runs a large medical student and resident NGO, probably the largest healthcare NGO in the world, called Incision. And Kadiyun had helped me get in touch with the Palestinian-American Medical Association, who initially told me, I'm sorry, we're booked up for a while. And then 5 days later, they told me that their orthopedic surgeon had canceled, can I go? And with 5 days or 7 days notice, I was on standby flights to Cairo.
And what date was that?
April 24th, I believe, 23rd.
So you first went to Gaza in April. So it had actually been many months already into the genocidal assault.
That's right. By the time I got there, we had already dropped the equivalent of all the TNT that we had dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima onto a tract of land that was smaller than Nagasaki, about 3 weeks.
And can you give us a sense of what your day was like? You wake up in the morning and what happens? And how different is it from how you would typically see patients in the US? Give us, a sense of those details.
Well, seeing this is absolutely nothing like seeing patients in the U.S. The closest comparison would be how did I see patients after the earthquake in Haiti? There's nothing scheduled. There's nothing elective. Difference between Gaza and Haiti is that the earthquake in Gaza happened every time a drone spotted a collection of people to guide bombs towards them. Whereas the earthquake in Haiti, minus some minor aftershocks, was a single devastating event. I believe that when you look at the body counts, when all this is done, they're going to be very close in approximation to each other. There's this bullshit line that there's 40,000 Palestinians that are dead. Those are the bodies that were not under the rubble. The Lancet just came out with an article, and they surmised that up to 250,000 are dead, which means that there may be even more, because many of the people that we saw were pieces of people that we saw were so vaporized, there's not going to be a way to count them. And whole families are gone. So there's no way for a family member to say, yeah, my 3 cousins that I used to see every day are not around anymore. That type of demographic tracking will be gone forever. There may be well more than 250,000 Palestinians that are killed in this. So back to your question, it wasn't an organized day. My life is highly organized in the United States. And even when I go to St. Pedro Sula, Honduras, where I go now for my overseas mission work, the quote unquote murder capital of the world, there's still organized patient flow. There may be a quarter mile long of patients waiting to be seen outside the clinic, but it's organized. We can impart organization into the process. In Gaza, there's no organization. Bombings would happen at rather predictable times, at least, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen all day long. I was there during Ramadan, the evening meal, iftar was being celebrated. The bombings would distinctly start happening right then. Of course, right before that, around 3 o'clock, the drones would become more audible. The drones would be sometimes visible. I'm not talking about the real high flying straight winged predator type, but there were lower quadcopters that would be audible, sometimes seen, mostly never. And the impression was that because of their timing, that they're localizing collections of people so that the indiscriminate bombing would be more effective. And sure enough, it was. The population that suffered the most were children, mostly because there was more children there than any place on earth, but also a toddler can't be thrown for 20 feet and survive it as well as an adult can be thrown for 10 feet. And the same concussion from a bomb, not even being hit by the shrapnel, the concussion alone is enough to throw you 50 feet from one of these bombs. The hospital that we were in was never directly bombed, but there was a bombing outside the walls of the hospital. My guess is well over a quarter mile away, and the concussion was loud enough and forceful enough to knock out the windows in our building, throw me against the wall where I broke a finger and lost half of a tooth. And we never saw the bomb, just the concussion from it. And I can't imagine a toddler surviving the same hit that I took, or an infant, or survive the debris from a broken window or a flying piece of concrete. So the bombs would go off, and depending on how far away it was, 10 to 20 minutes later, the ambulances would come in, or pickup trucks loaded with people, or a donkey cart pulling in some people. And they'd place them on gurneys, and the exam room at the European Gaza hospital that we were at was probably the size of the kitchen that I'm in. It was enough typically to handle 4 gurneys, about the size of two typical American hospital inpatient rooms. Small is the point. But in that small room, there were four gurneys tightly packed, and on each gurney was never less than three or four kids piled up on that gurney. A third were dead or dying, a third were savable, and a third will die. And everybody's missing a body part, or they have shrapnel penetrating their torso, or indenting their skull, or shredding their skin, burned like a hot dog left ignored on the grill. And these are not minor injuries. And although we saw some minor injuries, the minor injuries themselves were devastating to this population because we had very minimal supplies. There's no remotely developed country in the world where a baby with a 15% body burn is going to die, not even in Honduras. Even in the most remote hospital, that baby's going to live, but not in Gaza. There's no way of knowing what their electrolytes were. The equipment is damaged. There's no electrolytes to give them. There's no dressings. The infection rate is 100%. We would leave wounds. In my practice here, I close wounds like a zipper, very tight, very hermetically sealed with perfect stitching. There we would leave wounds open, anticipating for infection to come. So it would drain deliberately because the infection was going to come. It's functionally Civil War medicine, where in many places they were doing amputations without anesthesia. We would have to remove screws from people's arms and legs without anesthesia. It was just brutal medicine that was below developing country levels of medicine.
Seems like we have a new contender for murder capital of the world.
Oh, clearly. That's a name that St. Pedro Sula got before Ukraine. I'm sure that gives it some competition as well. But this is clearly the murder capital of the world. I was at a talk last night where a fellow said that a survivor of Vietnam said we dropped more tonnage in Vietnam than we did in any war in history. That wasn't true. We really dropped it per square mile in Gaza, and hundreds of thousands of people died directly from those bombs. And you're going to find those numbers are duplicated in Gaza.
Can you talk a little bit about what you would do when you would see children that you didn't know where their family was? I mean, what is the process that has developed in Gaza to deal with the wounded child, no surviving family, or the child who may have a family but has just arrived at the hospital by themselves?
Well, I divorced myself from that process not by intent, but because I was too busy dealing with wounds. But, I've seen firsthand some of the situations where families were separated. That was aggravated and mostly by the fact that Israel would not let any man out of the country. And so, in my personal experience, we had a young boy who had a cancer in his tibia, the lower bone of his leg, and it was an osteosarcoma, the worst kind of bone cancer that you can get. And he needed a leg amputation. In most developed countries, there's limb salvage surgery where you can save the leg, but that's not going to happen there. And so we're trying to get him into Egypt, where they may or may not have limb salvage surgery, but in order to save this child's life, the baby had to go. And so we got permission for the baby to go. Here's the caveat. Father, who was with the baby, lost his wife, its extended families, as you folks know. Both grandparents had died, on both sides of the family. Many uncles, if not all uncles, had died. I suspect all uncles had died, and aunts that were there. The father had lost all of his other children. He is literally, in a large extended family, the only surviving member with his son. And that's because he was out getting water with his son when his building was bombed. And dozens of his extended family members were living in one apartment. They were evacuated from the north, and they moved into a family's apartment. And the only surviving members that weren't buried in the rubble were, in fact, this 7-year-old, his father. In order for that baby's life to be saved, the father had to give the baby up. He wasn't allowed to go to Egypt with him. And the likelihood of him seeing his son again is close to zero because he'll never be allowed out of Gaza. And it's tough to track the kid down now. We don't know what happened to him. And so that father put more saturated tears on my scrubs, crying, than I had blood on my shoes. And I had a shitload of blood on my shoes. And how do you fix that? I mean, that's a wound that can never be healed. That's a Sophie's Choice type decision that he had to make. Of course, there was no choice for him But how do you measure that pain? He would have rather have taken a bullet in his own leg and lost it than give up his son. And so it just reflects on the vast amount of psychological damage that's happening in Gaza that's not being paid attention to. And that's another story. I know that when I came back, my nightmares were insane. I was lucky if I got an hour of sleep a night and wake up crying. And I was not on the receiving end of any of it. Just witnessed it.
You raise a really important point, I think, and it echoes something which we've been saying here, and we've raised this before, the notion that Israel is torturing everyone in Gaza. So it's not sufficient to speak of casualties and numbers of those killed, because that's not actually a metric for anything. It's not a metric for the lived experience of the 2.3 million people in Gaza. Everyone is undergoing permanent, uninterrupted torture, trauma, which, medical professionals have spoken about how Gaza is not a case of PTSD because we're not in a post scenario. We're in a present traumatic reality that doesn't end. And so it really is creating, in a sense, something different in terms of the way that it is breaking people down psychologically and scarring them not only for life but for generations to come.
But that's the intent. I mean, that's just part of the dehumanization process. It's not just a depopulation exercise that the IDF and the Israeli government, it's a complete dehumanization process. Why else would you bomb museums? Why else would you bomb every school, every medical school into below grade level? Why else would you bomb every clinic? Why would you bomb chicken coops? Why would you bomb water purification plants? Why would you bomb sewage treatment plants if you didn't know that there was going to be an increase in polio and an increase in hepatitis A that everybody had there? There wasn't a white eye there. They're all green colored, and many patients had palpable livers. Why would you bomb elementary schools and mosques and churches, Catholic churches? Why would you destroy things that have clear no military value? Why would you close a hospital? The European Gaza hospital, and after I left, they had one other brigade that came, and Adam Hamawe was the last one to leave. He refused to leave until every patient was safely evacuated. He's a hero of mine. He's an American Egyptian descent, married to a Palestinian wife, who saved Tammy Duckworth's life by amputating both of her legs when her helicopter crashed in Afghanistan. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army who had trouble meeting with congressmen with me, in spite of the fact that he was a military person and in spite of the fact that he saved one of their colleagues' lives.
They wouldn't meet him because he wanted to talk about Gaza.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
He saved Tammy Duckworth's life. You can't get them all right, Come on.
No, in all seriousness, she deserved to be saved. And she's a valuable person in this process because every single person who's Zionistic in their thinking, that's an opportunity for us. That's an opportunity for a vote generator, a lawmaker to be changed. Everybody thinks that this process is going to change by playing checkers, and it's not. It's a chess game. When the bombs stop dropping, the war comes to an end. And that means that when America stops giving the IDF the bombs, the war comes to an end. There would be no attacking Lebanon if we had stopped supplying weapons to them 24 hours before. And if it wasn't for American and German and to a lesser extent British bomb supplies, there would be no promulgation of this war. They're highly dependent on what we give to them. We just signed a $50 billion arms package with them that they wish to buy from us. That's insane.
I think it was 20. I think it was 20 billion.
20. What's the difference?
I mean,
if you're stabbed by 20 knives or 50 knives.
No, I hear you. We're like heavy on factual. Thanks. Because they lie so much. You know what I mean? They lie so much that we like feel the need to tell the truth like to a T and then like show our work about it. It's a
no. I appreciate that. Thanks, thanks for correcting me. Appreciate that. You can I invite anybody to fact check anything that I say. I'm not advancing myself as a journalist. I had to be a functional journalist because they're not allowed in Gaza, which is why I'm speaking to you. This is something that's way out of my element. I am not comfortable doing this. But one of the things that we realized is that those who were assigned to tell the truth and to analyze for the truth were not allowed in the country by design, by Israel's design. And not even independent networks that would call them out on their shit are allowed in Israel. Purported democracy, and they're stifling, free opinion. Indeed, I gave a talk to CNN, and I forget the name of the lady who was standing in for Christiana Amanpour, and I pointed out that I have firsthand visualization of children being assassinated, and by looking at their bodies, and she said CNN cannot independently verify this. To which I said it was cut. To which I said no shit, because you're not allowed there. But when more than one doctor says they see children being shot by high velocity sniper rifles exactly where I would put my stethoscope, and not in it, not or but end in the side of the temple, and you see that well more than one time, twice on one gurney, then since no sniper shoots a baby, and these are 6, 7-year-old kids, no baby gets shot twice perfectly by a sniper bullet by accident. That doesn't happen. These are deliberate assassinations of children. And when I am not the only doctor who says they saw this, there is your independent verification. So shame on CNN.
For the record, we believe you.
What exactly are they looking for in terms, what would that independent verification look like? You are a medical professional, you are a physician, you are exactly the type of person who should be doing the independent verification.
Well, when they're not allowed in the country at all, the only thing that they could and should have reported is that this was an accurate observation, and they can have gotten the opinion from other doctors. Indeed, I was on with another doctor who said that he saw it. That makes it independently verified, and I had never met that doctor until we met in Cairo. I knew him I sat next to him on the bus to Cairo. That's the first time I ever met this fellow, and he said he saw it. So, as have other doctors on other networks. Yeah, many doctors on other networks verified it, and CNN should have known that if they did their homework.
And it's not like this behavior is something that the occupation hasn't done before. We reported on one of the death marches how they sniped a child in the mother's
West Bank.
hands.
Right.
There was a mother
Haraz,
yeah.
right.
Go ahead,
Haraz just published last month that a kid on a soccer field in the West Bank was sniped. Published in an Israeli newspaper. That's a highly respected newspaper.
I think that depends on who you ask, but I hear you.
Can you talk a little bit about your background and your own personal journey towards getting to this place where you see Palestinians as human and you've defied the propaganda that maybe you grew up with? Because I think it's not a straightforward path.
We all grow up with propaganda, right? My father was not a practicing Jew. I think he was in a synagogue 3 times in his life. But we lit a menorah at Christmas time and things like that. My mother was Roman Catholic. My twin sister is a conservative Jew. My older brother is a knight in the Knights of Columbus in his Catholic Church. So I grew up free thinking, without biases or prejudices. And it's really my experience in overseas work that made me interested in what was happening in the Middle East. But in full disclosure, I still didn't understand the history, as 99.9% of most Americans, including American lawmakers, understand the history. We think as a population that that this shit happened starting October 7th. Nobody knows about the Quiet March. Nobody knows about the 75 years of oppression. Nobody has any idea what the topography of Gaza is. that their electromagnetic space, their internet, their TV, their telephones are controlled by Israel. Nobody knows that if you go more than 100 yards out into the ocean that you're going to be shot by a gunboat. Nobody knows that they don't have the water rights like every other country does on earth to go out into the ocean and go fishing, which they can't do. Nobody knows that Gaza needed 700 trucks of supplies a day to stay alive. Nobody knows that not allowed out of the country. There's no airport flying anything into the country. That their imports and their exports are 100% controlled by Israel, even through the Egyptian border, through the Rafah crossing where we went through. And there's a long, long history of abusing the Palestinian that most people just don't have a clue of what the truth is. And even when I went to dinner with a highly educated anesthesiologist friend of mine and his wife, who's a brilliant nurse case manager, after I got back, they said, well, don't they deserve it for what they did on October 7th? Not even knowing that 1 in 20 to 25,000 Palestinians are Hamas, not even knowing that they haven't had an election and that 65% of the people, Palestinians alive, never even voted in that election. That was what, 18 or 19 years ago. I don't know the exact year. You're going to correct me, right? No. Okay, you had your chance. And
It was 2005
yeah, uh,
or 2006.
yeah. And so there's hardly a Gazan alive over 65. And if you look at their population dynamic curve, you see them, but they're rare. So most of the people who were eligible to vote or who were not alive then, they had no opportunity to declare what government they wanted.
But even the logic that if you did vote for them, that you would be responsible for their actions is faulty logic because we don't accept that for, the United States, for example, that Americans should be killed because America kills people also abroad.
That's exactly right.
Did those people vote for George W. Bush? You know what I mean? Like, did they vote
Right.
for Barack Obama? Because he was responsible for a lot of deaths.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
But it's a racist logic that is applied to Palestinians, right? Whereas it's
And
not applied to
it's not
Europeans
applied.
or
It's not
Americans.
applied to any European country. It's not applied to any other country. It's certainly not applied to Israel.
I, for one, do think Americans should be killed for our political decisions, actually.
That's a joke. You're gonna have to tell people that's a joke.
Oh, it's obviously a joke. It was the super funniest thing to say. Get out of here.
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to hear that. It's very hard to be continually dehumanized in that way. And when you say, these are highly educated people saying things like this, it really hurts when I hear that. As a Palestinian, it really hurts.
It does. But that should guide us, just like Tammy, my comments on Tammy Duckworth. That guides on how we play chess in the solution of it, right? So those are the valuable people that we have to convert their thinking on, because they're not mean people. These are loving, caring people. They truly are. They just are misguided in their education. And that's largely the effect of the AIPAC and the funding of the huge funding, which is greater than the AIPAC from the evangelical Christian groups. And that's the process that has to be reversed in our country. Um, Instead of criticizing Duckworth, try to flip her.
Like, push her over? Or
No, that was cold, cold and insensitive.
oh well. Oh no, she supports genocide. Who knows? Oh no.
She does now, but she's still an empowered person who's going to be a vote getter and a lawmaker for the next decade. So the charge should be to try to flip her.
I think it's a good transition into the advocacy that you have done since you've been back from Gaza. And I know that you've participated in writing a letter to the Biden administration with dozens of other medical professionals who have been to Gaza and treated patients in Gaza. And you've also done a number of interviews with the mainstream outlets. Can you speak a little bit more about the advocacy and where you see there's been any impact, if any?
Sure. Yeah. So it's how you measure impact is something that that most surgeons understand in the form of delayed gratification. I was damn near 40 before I started to make money. I knew I would make a decent amount of money when I was done. That's delayed gratification, right? My brother, who started working in high school and never went to college, he wanted his money right away. He had his fancy sports car right away, and he wasn't into delayed gratification. So that there's a process of delayed gratification. Well, that's what I think is a process that we have to do in much of what we see in life that has long-term payoffs. That's how we treat patients. I'll do a nerve decompression for a nerve that's pinched and they have a numb hand. And although they want to have feeling back in their hand when they wake up from that surgery, that's not going to happen in somebody who's had a chronic disease because it's a process that starts the moment that I take the pressure off. But healing takes time. That's no different in this situation. We can start to take the pressure off the disease, but healing will still take time. Look at every civil rights movement that ever existed. It's not it's not a straight slope down to success. It's more like a ski slope where there's good months and bad months, good years and bad years, but eventually it asymptotes down, to fairness. And just look at our history and how we treated Haiti. Their revolt was 5 years, and independence were 5 years before us, and we've oppressed Haiti ever since then, primarily to stop the slaves from revolting in our country, and that's never stopped. Our economic repression of Haiti continues to this day. And if you just listen to Vance criticize them, it comes out of our mouths so easily. Criticizing another population that the U.S. has horribly oppressed over 100 years. Not any different than what we're doing in Palestine, minus the fact that we're not bombing Haiti yet. Although historically we did. And I think we have to have the long play here to solve this problem. Pushing Tammy Duckworth down does not have the payoff of getting her to modify her opinion.
Have you tried it?
And you talk about pushing her down. Yeah, that was funny. We as advocates who don't play the long play is smart, or is not smart. For example, the students that want to defund investment, that's a long play maneuver. That's brilliant. It's just restricting funding of the military machine that's feeding Israel. That's a long play, brilliant maneuver. Uh, Standing outside of Rayathon with placards is a short play maneuver that's going to go no frickin' place. So, I admire the people who do that. The long play maneuvers are really the ones that are going to win. Other long play maneuvers like limiting how much, um, pressing for legislation that limits how much, first of all, for term limits to stop these bastards from spending their lives making our laws, which makes them susceptible to AIPIC and ultra Christian money, because they'll do anything to keep that money coming, and have their election campaigns funded. Limiting how much funds they can get will probably never happen. Limiting their terms may or may not happen. But limiting how much they can spend on an election, irrespective of how much they collect, is tenable. That's something that may be reasonable. We have never in our history challenged the quality of our Supreme Court before, but it's happening now.
So if I'm correct, I heard you endorse BDS.
BBS, who's BBS?
Oh no, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. You were talking about college divestments, etc.
You got to watch acronyms around me. I'm thinking, what frickin' disease is BDS that has to be treated?
No, BDS is really good, actually. It's the treatment to a disease.
Yeah. No, I fully endorse that. I met with the UNC student leadership last night, and they have one Jewish fellow who's still suspended from UNC. My dear friends who actually helped me get on this podcast is a student at an Ivy League institution, which will remain nameless because she will be targeted. Ivy League schools, which should advance the debate of what's going on in the world, particularly their global studies departments and their public health departments and their political science departments, are actually getting it stifled. Professors are being fired because of their personal emails and tweets. What type of bullshit is that?
Yeah, I actually went to the UCLA encampment and did a little field reporting on the ground. And I spoke to a professor who would not go on record because they didn't have tenure. And they knew that if they said anything publicly, they would be targeted, fired, and, attacked.
Absolutely. I'll give you another example of even where people are sensitive, but they also know they have to keep their jobs. When we were in Gaza, we started to teach medical school classes again for all the medical students that migrated to this hospital to help. Now, that told us something about those medical students. One, that they were student leaders because they went out of their way, abandoned their remaining families just so that they could help in the one of the remaining hospitals that were there, and really the best remaining hospital that was there. And they self-sacrificed tremendously just to help their brothers and sisters. So we kept their names, obviously. And then when I got back to the United States, this lady that I just mentioned and I tried and successfully contacted, mostly the work was hers, contacted every single medical school in the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean, typically where Americans might go to medical school, try to procure placement for these superstar Palestinian medical students, which it's a 6-year medical school program, and they ranged from year 1 to year 6. And she successfully got out of the 210 or 20, I don't remember exactly, but it was over 200. Of the 200 medical school programs, only 6 or 7, only 5 said yes for MD programs, and 2 said yes to dental programs. 1 said yes to undergraduate programs. The deans of admission to all of those medical schools that said yes, when we asked them, help me out here, Dean, why you and not the other schools? What is it, right? The only common denominator that every one of those medical schools, deans of admission that said yes was that all of those deans were Jewish, that they recognized the horrible situation that was going on, and they felt the obligation to help. But if we do it on the QT, because they know that the political milieu that they swim in is going to cost them their job if they made it public. So they would give us support. They'd give a seat to this medical student, but only if we didn't advertise the who, what, where, when, or why of it.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
Zionists don't care that like I'm Jewish. They have been trying to make my life a living hell. I do
that's
comedy.
right.
They've reached out to every major comedy club in Los Angeles trying to make sure I don't get booked there. Joke's
Wow.
on them. I already don't get booked there. Thank you so much. Okay.
This battle that's going on in the Gaza Strip is not a Jewish versus Islamic battle. It's nothing more than a fucking land grab, right? Let's call it what it is. Modern Zionism is just, I want your land. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with advancing Judaism. In fact, Zionism is the biggest threat to Judaism in the world. That the most dangerous place for a Jew to be on earth is in Israel.
Great points. Thank you,
We agree with
doctor.
you. We agree with you very much. A last question, giving us a little bit more insight about some of the patients that you treated in Gaza. I know you've had an opportunity in different interviews to share some anecdotes about individuals, but we'd love to give you an opportunity to just tell us about some of the people that you treated, whether they were success stories or not. But if you just want to amplify some of their stories.
But anybody who lives is a success story. 95% of our patients will be deformed the rest of their lives. Jury is one that we spoke of a lot because she just grabbed our hearts, as did her family. Every member of her family was hurt in a bomb blast. She lost both of her butt cheeks. Her sciatic nerve, which is as big as anybody's thumb, it's that far deep in your butt cheek, below your gluteal or butt muscles, and it gives motor capability to most of the muscles in your leg and feeling in your lower leg. Her nerve was severed. She lost so much of her butt cheeks that her nerve was severed, and she lost several inches of that nerve. She also had a shrapnel piece that went through her lower thigh and blew out the bone and a lot of the muscles in her thigh, right above her knee. So our team and an English team together in a series of surgeries. And when I left, she probably had 10 surgeries, and she probably had 10 or 15 more since then. Uh, uh, First cleaned up the wound infection, which was largely cleaned up for us by the 1,000 maggots that we took out of her butt cheeks. And if it wasn't for the maggots, she would have died. They kept her wounds clean.
Can you explain that? Because a lot of people maybe don't realize that that's a technique, actually.
Well, sure. In the Bahamas, I have actually moved maggots from one person's infected wound to another. Maggots eat necrotic tissue. That's all they do. And it's when you don't have the ability to take somebody to the operating room, maggots do a good job in cleaning out the infected tissue. Disgusting as they may be, they do a job. And there's an old phrase that my father used to tell me in medicine is that you have to dance with who brought you. It applies here. So we cleaned the maggots out of her, cleaned off the rest of the necrotic tissue. Plastic surgeon from England and a specialty a lower extremity surgeon from England helped shorten her leg at the knee, which made the nerve longer at her butt, and then we sewed the nerve together. But so she has a leg that's 5 inches shorter. That alone is devastating to a 12-year-old girl. She'll never walk normally again. She may not regain and will never regain normal sensation or function in that leg. So that's not an unusual story. That's a typical story of a polytrauma patient.
When you're doing all of this and, given the reports about the lack of anesthesia, are you just working in a continuous environment of screams? I mean, or are people so detached from the trauma that they're numb?
I will send you a photo that you can put as part of this podcast of earlier I spoke of a boy with 15% body burns that died. I'll show you a picture of a boy, and his face tells a million stories. He's totally painless in his expression. As the photograph is seen shooting between his legs, which are burnt to a crisp from his waist down, you'll see a catheter coming out from his perineum where his penis used to be because it's burned off. And you'll see on the bed next to him a piece of burnt tissue, which is his butt cheek that fell off in the bed. And he's not crying. He's so cried out. Pain is just his norm. And I burn my finger on the stove and my life comes to a fucking end. And that picture really speaks volumes to me about what children endure and what they can endure. This kid certainly had died. There's no way that this kid could have ever survived with a 50% body burn. Then there's the story of healthcare workers that were specifically targeted. I just, before this call, I was communicating through Signal with a gentleman who's been evacuated to Egypt. He's a nurse. He was in the operating room closing a wound that he on somebody that was just operated on. An Israeli soldier bursts into the operating room and orders him to abandon that patient. He refuses, saying, I have to close his wound. The Israeli soldier, without any other warning, shoots him in his leg, blows his knee across the room, and leaves. They take that guy off the operating room table and put this nurse on the operating room table and fix his leg as good as they can. He's missing a substantial portion of bone, so they fill the defect with plastic. It's a moldable plastic that's used to glue in artificial joints. It's sterile when you get it. So they fill his bony defect with that. He's missing a whole lot of skin and missing a whole lot of muscle. This is a high-velocity rifle bullet wound. They're very unforgiving. And then he's taken to the floor in the hospital. The Israeli soldiers then come and get him and take him to Israel, to a prison. He spent 45 days there, given a juice box sometimes every day, but mostly every other day. He's handcuffed. He's blindfolded the whole time. So he's tortured. They're breaking every rule in the Geneva Convention. He's starved. He's clearly not a Hamas fighter because he's a nurse in the hospital, but moreover, they let him go, which they never would have done if he was Hamas. They let him go on the 45th day, dumped him on the border of Gaza. He crawled naked for 3 kilometers. It's still an infected wound. He got zero medical care when he was there. And he crawls, now his wound is festering, obviously, after 45 days of no medical care. Now it's really filthy. Before they said goodbye to him, they gave him a rifle butt in his right eye and exploded his eyeball. And so he's now permanently blind in his right eye. And he comes to the European Gaza hospital in a coma, probably from the blast of the rifle butt hitting his face. And when I got to him, he had bed sores on the back of his head and his ears, something I've never seen in my life. He's had him on the tips of his scapula because he's so emaciated and starved. He's lost 50 pounds of body weight. He looks like the same skeleton that I saw in my father's photographs when he helped liberate Jews from Auschwitz. I have sepia photographs of which we've all seen, but my father took them. Emaciated Jews and piles of dead emaciated Jews with nothing but skin over skeletons. That's what this guy looked like lying in bed. And the never again was repeated in my life in front of me. And the and then we operated on this guy several times, and he's had several surgeries since. And I got a picture from him the other day from a dear friend of mine, Amani, who's a therapist, sent me a picture of him walking with a walker, going on 1 year after he was shot. Well, I guess it's 9 months. So that's a perfect example of somebody who's tortured in every possible way, and how they specifically targeted healthcare workers. And there are hundreds of healthcare workers that have been targeted and killed. I myself was told, don't walk below a window or by a window with your scrubs on. So I've operated on several healthcare workers that were shot with the intent of being killed. So those are a couple stories, but they're not atypical, the ones I told you. There are ones that touched me, but there's worse stories out there. The kids that were assassinated, though, one kid, the worst photograph I've taken was that of a father who's lying on the floor, drenched in his son's blood, with the drape that separates the different exam, the big exam, the small exam room that holds the 4 gurneys, and had shower curtains that would separate them for privacy. And he's laying on the floor in his son's blood, covering his shirt, and the curtain he's using the curtain to dry his tears. And then I'll provide that picture for you because his son shot in the chest and in the temple. And his story to me was, I heard nothing. I felt my son pull hard out of my hand, like he was being yanked out of my hand. And I looked down at the ground and I didn't see him. And 4 meters down the pathway, he was lying when I saw him get shot in the head. And he didn't even realize it was the shot in the chest first that knocked him 4 meters away. And then while on the ground, he was shot in the head with a completely different bullet trajectory, one straight up, aiming straight at his chest. Because the bullet went right into his chest and came out his back. And the kid is missing his spine. He's missing his heart. He's missing his lungs. There's a hole this big in a chest that's this wide. There's a hole that big. And every organ is missing out of this kid, from the tips of his scapula out. And there's a hole in his temple right in front of his ear hole. And the other side of his brain is gone. So 2 different bullet trajectories at 2 different times, specifically targeted. How do you explain that? What monster does that?
Did you see the Israeli occupation forces when you were there?
Never one. Never saw one. We were in fear of them the whole time. We saw the F-16s and we saw the F-35s dropping weapons, and we saw them. They would drop a bomb and then quickly turn and drop chaff, and that was visible several times. We never saw the soldier. We never saw a tank.
I guess you never tried to go to the north of Gaza.
Oh no. So I know that you're aware of what the process is called, deconfliction, right? I'll explain it to your viewers. When you cross the border at any crossing, you go through a process called deconfliction, where through your phone, with or without an Israeli SIM card, usually with, you get notified that you personally are cleared to cross that border. And sometimes a group of you get deconflicted in a van, where the van driver carries the phone that's always on. And when your phone screen turns green, you are being allowed by the IDF to go on the predetermined pathway that you said, to be tracked to have your phone tracked along that pathway from which you can never deviate or you will be targeted.
And you may still be targeted in any event.
Well, of course. I mean, the World Central Kitchen vans, when we were there, were targeted. They had 6 and 7 phones in each one of those vans, all of which were deconflicted, and all of which gave GPS signals to where that bomb could very precisely hit, especially when military GPS is orders of magnitude more accurate than civilian GPS. And my civilian GPS can tell me within 4 feet if I'm in the right place. That could tell you within 4 millimeters if you're in the right place. Um, and so there's no mistaking that the World Central Kitchen vans were deliberately bombed.
Now we know that they could blow up the cell phones too if they wanted.
Our fear was that we could be bombed at any time because we knew healthcare workers were being targeted. And our fear was enhanced because Chuck Schumer wouldn't return my call, even though I spoke to his secretary 3 times. I spoke to his office 4 times, spoke to his secretary twice. The U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem would not return an email to me. They acknowledged getting my several emails, but they wouldn't return a communication to me when we were begging after the World Central Kitchen bombing to please ensure our safety. That just argued the complicity of my government and what was going on. And then the worst thing that we saw was the contradiction of when we entered through the Rafah crossing and then when we exited. When we entered, I was kind of, hey, thumbs up to the world. There's a 5-mile long line of 18-wheeler tractor trailers loaded with watermelons and loaded with sacks of flour and potatoes, and they had other trucks that were covered with UNHCR and UNICEF and CARE and Feed the Children and World Central Kitchen and all these other UN-based and private NGO-based relief agencies, 5 miles long, 2 trucks wide, bumper to bumper, waiting to get in. Boy, that's the best thing in the world. There's the 700 trucks that Gaza needed every day on October 6th and every day before then, and they're letting them in. The problem was they never let them in. They never let the water trucks in. They never let the trucks load of chickens in. They all died on the truck. The potatoes rotted on the truck. And we know that because on our way out, we saw those same trucks. But instead of being 5 miles long and 2 abreast, it's now 30 miles long and 8 abreast. Both entrance and exit 4-lane highways are both filled with incoming trucks, bumper to bumper, with their motors turned off because Israel refuses to give them deconfliction. And so when you really want to dehumanize a population, the best way to do that is to kill the humans. And if you can't bomb every one of them, you sure as hell can starve them to death. You can withhold medications. You can close the hospitals. You can let diseases like polio and hepatitis and chickenpox and other respiratory diseases that kill kids in our country, you could let them spread. You can close every clinic. You could bomb every small clinic. You could target every healthcare facility with the express purpose of denying healthcare, which aggravates starvation, so that more people die of infection than they die of the bullet hole that hit their limb, just like they did in the Civil War in our country. More people died of infection from the musket ball than they did from the musket ball. And that type of denial of humanitarian aid is the worst of all things, because to every American lawmaker, it should scream loudly to you that you're breaking every stinking fucking American law. The Leahy Act of 1965 specifically states that you're not allowed to withhold humanitarian aid to a country when an opposing force is attacking that country, when you're supplying military aid to that attacking force. It specifically dictates that the arms sales and supplies to Israel should be withheld if humanitarian aid is being withheld to the country that war is being promulgated in. And that's exactly what we do for every country on earth except one, and that's Israel.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Perlmutter, for your time, for sharing what you saw with us, and for the work that you're doing, all your advocacy. We really appreciate you and respect you, and we wish you safety on your journey if you go back.
1st of January, if I can.
Well, thank you so much, folks. That has been another episode of the podcast. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at @thepalestinepod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com, and consider supporting us on Patreon. www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the pod. Thank y'all so much for watching. Have as good a day as you can.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.